The sun hung low and merciless over the Nebraska prairie, painting the dried grass in shades of copper and rust. Clara Mitchell pressed her son closer to her chest, feeling the sharp angles of his ribs through the threadbare fabric of his shirt. Little Thomas, barely 4 years old, had stopped crying hours ago. That frightened her more than any wailing could have. Her feet, wrapped in what remained of her boots, left small clouds of dust with each step. The leather had split weeks back, somewhere between the last town that turned them away and this endless stretch of nothing. She'd stuffed prairie grass inside to cushion her bleeding soles, but it did little against the burning earth. "Mama?" Thomas whispered, his voice like dried leaves. "My belly hurts." "I know. Sweet boy. I know." Clara's own voice cracked. She'd given him the last of their water at dawn, watching him drink with eyes that seemed too large for his gaunt face. Her tongue felt like sandpaper against the roof of her mouth. But that didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding shelter before nightfall. The homesteads scattered across the territory might as well have been mirages. At the last one, a modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, the woman had taken one look at Clara's widow's dress and slammed the door. Bad luck follows the grieving, she'd heard through the wood. Find somewhere else to die. Clara had knocked at 7 doors since her husband James passed 3 months back. Cholera took him quick, left her with nothing but debt and a child too young to understand why Papa wouldn't wake up. The general store owner had given them 2 weeks before he seized their small room above the shop. That was 6 weeks ago. She'd tried honest work first, washing, mending, anything her hands could do. But the other women whispered when she passed. Widow's curse, they said, bringing death to any house that sheltered her. Superstition ran deep in these frontier towns, deeper than Christian charity. The bundle in her arms stirred weakly. Thomas's breathing had grown shallow, rattling in his chest like seeds in a dry gourd. His skin burned with fever despite the cooling evening air. Clara knew that sound had heard it in other children before they were wrapped in small shrouds. The knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. Ahead, she spotted another structure, larger than most, with a barn and corral attached. Horses moved behind the fence rails, their coats gleaming with health. Someone with horses had money. Money meant food. Food meant her boy might see another sunrise. Clara's legs trembled as she approached. Pride had long since been stripped away, layer by layer, like bark from a dying tree. All that remained was the raw, desperate need to keep her child breathing. The main house sat solid and unpretentious, built of good lumber rather than sod. Tools hung in neat rows on the barn wall. Everything spoke of a careful, methodical owner. Clara stopped at the gate, swaying slightly. She'd eaten nothing but prairie turnips for 3 days, and those had run out yesterday. Through the barn's open doors, she saw him, a tall man, broad-shouldered, working at an anvil, the ring of hammer on metal carried across the dusty yard. He wore no hat, and his dark hair caught the dying light. His movements were economical, practiced, the movements of someone who'd learned not to waste energy in this unforgiving land. Clara cleared her throat. The sound barely carried over the hammering. She tried again. Louder. "Sir?" The hammering stopped. The man turned slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. His face was weathered but not old, maybe 35 years to her 23. Dark eyes assessed her with the same careful attention he'd given his work. His expression revealed nothing. "Sir," Clara began again, hating how her voice shook. I need—" The words she'd rehearsed scattered like startled birds. What could she say? That she'd walked for days? That her child was dying? That she'd do anything, for a crust of bread and a corner to lay him down? The man waited, patient as stone. He set down his hammer but said nothing. Clara drew what dignity remained around her like a tattered shawl. "I can work," she said. "I can cook, clean, mend. I know horses." This last was only partly true. James had kept one old mare before the debts forced its sale. "I don't need wages. Just—" Her voice broke. "Just food for my boy. A place to sleep. I'll be your servant. Whatever you need. Please." The word servant tasted like ash. Her mother would have died of shame to hear it. The Thompsons had been respectable people back in Ohio, before Clara married for love and followed James west. But respectability didn't fill empty bellies or cool, fevered brows. The man, she noticed his shirt, bore the marks of hard labor. Sweat-stained but clean, studied her for a long moment. His gaze moved to Thomas, taking in the child's stillness, the unhealthy flush on hollow cheeks. "I'll sign papers," Clara continued desperately. "Indenture myself proper. 7 years, 10, whatever you want. I'm strong when I'm fed. I don't complain. I know my place." Each word carved another piece from her soul, but she forced them out. "I'll be your property if that's what it takes. Just please, don't let my baby die." The silence stretched between them, heavy as the approaching darkness. Somewhere a coyote called, answered by another. The horses nickered softly in their stalls. Clara's arms ached from carrying Thomas, but she didn't dare set him down, afraid she might not have the strength to lift him again. The man took a step forward, then another. Clara instinctively moved back, then forced herself to stand still. If he wanted to inspect her like livestock, she'd endure it. If he wanted other things, she'd endure that too. For Thomas, she'd endure anything. But he stopped an arm's length away, his expression still unreadable. Up close, she could see a thin scar along his jaw, the kind left by shrapnel or a grazing bullet. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, bore the calluses of honest work, not the soft hands of men who lived by others' labor. "What's wrong with the boy?" His voice, when it finally came, was low and rough, like he didn't use it often. "Fever," Clara admitted. "And hunger. He hasn't had proper food and—" She couldn't finish. The shame burned too hot. The man's eyes moved back to Thomas, and something flickered in their depths. Not pity, she'd seen enough of that, usually followed by closing doors. Something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "You got a name?" he asked. "Clara Mitchell. This is Thomas, he's 4. She lifted her chin slightly. "My husband died 3 months back. Cholera. I'm not sick, and neither was Thomas till the hunger got him. We're not carrying any disease." The man nodded once, as if she'd answered a question he hadn't asked. He turned and walked toward the house, leaving Clara standing in the yard. Her heart sank. Another rejection, another door closing. She'd have to keep walking, though she didn't know if her legs would carry her to the next homestead. Maybe she could find a sheltered spot. Hold Thomas through one more night. The man stopped at his door and looked back. "You coming or not?" Clara blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Sir?" "Getting dark," he said, as if that explained everything. "Coyotes get bold when they smell weakness." He pushed open the door and disappeared inside. Clara stood frozen for a moment, then stumbled forward. Her boots caught on a stone and she nearly fell, catching herself at the last second. Thomas whimpered softly against her shoulder. "It's all right," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. "We're going inside." The house's interior was simple but clean. A main room with a kitchen area, a stone fireplace, a table and 2 chairs. A ladder led to what must be a loft. Everything was functional, built by someone who understood the difference between necessity and luxury. No woman's touch softened the edges. No curtains, no tablecloth, no flowers in jars. The man was already at the stove, adding wood to the firebox. He moved with the same unhurried efficiency she'd noticed in the barn. A pot sat waiting, and he added water from a bucket, then reached for a burlap sack that might contain beans or grain. Clara stood just inside the door, Thomas a dead weight in her arms. She didn't know where to go, what to do. The warmth of the room made her dizzy after so long in the open air. Her legs trembled with the effort of remaining upright. "Set him down by the fire," the man said without turning. "There's a blanket on that chair." Clara moved carefully to the fireplace, her movements slow and painful. She laid Thomas on the rough wooden floor, then grabbed the blanket wool, thick and surprisingly soft, as she tucked it around her son. His eyes fluttered open. "Mama? I'm here, baby. We're inside now. It's warm." The man appeared beside them, holding a cup. "Water first," he said. "Small sips. Too much too fast will make him sick." Clara took the cup with shaking hands, helped Thomas drink. The boy managed 3 tiny sips before turning his head away. Even that small effort exhausted him. "When did he eat last?" the man asked. Clara couldn't meet his eyes. 2 days, maybe 3. I gave him the last of what we had." "And you?" She didn't answer. What was the point? Mothers didn't eat when their children starved. That was the natural order of things. The man made a sound that might have been disapproval. He returned to the stove, and soon the smell of something cooking filled the room. Clara's stomach clenched painfully. She pressed a hand against it, willing it to silence. "I haven't asked your name," she said quietly. "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan Carter." "Mr. Carter, I meant what I said outside. I'll work for our keep. I'll sign any papers you want. I won't be a burden." He stirred whatever was in the pot. It smelled like beans and salt pork, and Clara had to close her eyes against the sudden wave of dizziness. "No papers," he said. "But I need to earn—" "No papers," he repeated, his tone ending the discussion. Clara fell silent, confused and wary. Men didn't take in desperate women and sick children without expecting something in return. She'd learned that lesson in the weeks since James died, seen it in the eyes of men who offered help with strings attached like spider silk, invisible until you were trapped. But Ethan Carter just continued cooking, as if having strangers in his home was an everyday occurrence. When the food was ready, he ladled a small portion into a bowl, added more water to thin it, and handed it to Clara. "Feed him slow," he instructed. "His stomach shrunk. Too much will come back up." Clara took the bowl, breathing in the steam. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. "Thank you," she whispered. She spooned tiny amounts into Thomas's mouth, coaxing him to swallow. He managed 5 or 6 spoonfuls before turning away. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in days. Ethan set another bowl on the floor beside her, along with a chunk of bread. "You next," he said. "I should wait until Thomas— Can't take care of him if you're dead." His tone was matter-of-fact, not harsh. "Eat." Clara looked up at him, searching his weathered face for some sign of his intentions. He met her gaze steadily, then turned away, giving her privacy. She heard him moving around the room, the scrape of a chair, the clink of metal on wood. She ate slowly, fighting the urge to wolf down the food. It was simple fare: beans, salt pork, bread that was a day old but still soft enough to chew. To Clara, it tasted like salvation. The silence in Ethan Carter's house was different from the silence of the prairie. Outside, the quiet held threats. Wolves, weather, the endless possibility of death. Inside, it felt like being wrapped in rough wool, not comfortable exactly, but protective. Clara sat by the fire, watching Thomas's chest rise and fall beneath the blanket, counting each breath like a miser counts coins. Ethan hadn't spoken since telling her to eat. He sat at the table, working a piece of leather with an awl, his movements precise and unhurried. The lamp cast a yellow circle of light around him, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. Clara studied him when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to understand this man who'd taken them in without questions or conditions. His face told no stories. The scar along his jaw could have come from anywhere. The war back east, an accident with tools, a disagreement that turned violent. His hands moved with the certainty of someone who'd done this work 1,000 times before. She noticed he favored his left shoulder slightly. An old injury, perhaps. A man who'd lived hard but survived. Thomas stirred, whimpering softly. Clara touched his forehead, still too warm, but perhaps not quite as burning as before. Or maybe that was just hope playing tricks on her mind. She'd learned not to trust hope. It had a way of making the fall harder when it left. "There's a bed in the loft," Ethan said suddenly, not looking up from his work. "You can take the boy up there." "We're fine here," Clara replied quickly. "By the fire is good. We don't need—" Wasn't a question. He set down the leather and stood. Moving to a chest in the corner, he pulled out another blanket, heavier than the first, and what looked like a child's shirt, too small for a man, too old to have been worn recently. He set both on the floor beside her. "That shirt," Clara began, then stopped. It wasn't her place to ask about the past of a man who'd shown them kindness. "Might fit the boy," Ethan said simply. "When the fever breaks." The unspoken story hung in the air between them. A child's shirt in a house with no child. Clara had seen enough grief to recognize its shape, even when it wore a silent face. She took the shirt, running her fingers over the careful stitching. Someone had mended a tear in the sleeve with tiny, even stitches. A woman's work, most likely. A mother's. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan returned to his seat, picked up the leather again. The awl pushed through, making holes for stitching. Clara watched his face in the lamplight, saw the way his jaw tightened slightly when he bent forward. Whatever old hurt he carried, it still pained him. "You don't talk much," she observed, then immediately regretted it. What right did she have to comment on his habits? "Words don't fix fences or feed horses," he replied. "No, I suppose they don't." Clara adjusted Thomas's blanket, tucking it more securely around his thin shoulders. "My husband talked enough for 3 men. Always had a story, a joke, a grand plan for how we'd strike it rich out here." She stopped, surprised at herself. She hadn't spoken of James to anyone since the funeral. "Talking men usually do," Ethan said. There was no judgment in it, just observation. Clara found herself almost smiling, a foreign sensation after so many weeks. He meant well, believed every word he said, too. That was the trouble. He'd believe anything if it sounded good enough. Believe the land agent who said the soil here was black as Mississippi bottomland. Believed the merchant who extended credit against future crops. Believed right up until the fever took him that next year would be better. "It wasn't?" "No." The word came out flat. "It wasn't." Ethan made another hole in the leather, then another. The rhythm was soothing, like rain on a roof. "Front gate needs fixing," he said after a while. "Barn door's got a broken hinge. Chicken coop's about to fall over. You know anything about any of that?" Clara blinked at the sudden change of subject. I can learn. I help James with building projects sometimes. I'm not afraid of work." "Didn't ask if you were afraid. Asked if you knew how." "Some," she admitted. "I can follow instructions. I understand tools." He nodded, apparently satisfied. "Coffee's in the tin by the stove. Make some in the morning. Strong. Rest we'll figure out as we go." Clara stared at him. "You're letting us stay?" "Already said you could, but I meant, you don't want—" She struggled for words that wouldn't shame her. Men usually want something specific when they take in a woman alone. Ethan's hand stilled on the leather. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since dinner. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "I've got 2 hands and a strong back. Can cook my own food and mend my own clothes. Don't need a woman for that." He paused, seemed to consider his words. "What I've got is work that wants doing and empty rooms going to waste. What you've got is need of both." Seems simple enough. "Nothing's ever that simple," Clara said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Not in my experience." "Then you've had poor experience." He returned to his work. "Door bolts from the inside. You're worried. Use it, but I'll be in the barn most nights anyway. Got a mare about to foal." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Kindness, real kindness without conditions or expectations, was so unexpected she didn't know how to receive it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help us? You don't know us. We could be thieves, murderers, anything." Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Boys about the age mine would have been." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Clara's breath caught. Would have been, not was. The child's shirt suddenly made terrible sense. "I'm sorry," she said. "Was a long time ago." His voice held no emotion, but his hands had stopped moving. Fever took him and his mother both, same week. Couldn't do anything but watch. He set down the awl, flexed his fingers. That was back in Kansas. Came here after, started over. Clara understood starting over. Understood running from places that held too many ghosts. What were their names? She asked gently. Sarah, and the boy was Daniel. He said the names like he hadn't spoken them in years. Maybe he hadn't. He was strong. Like yours. Fought hard at the end. They sat in silence after that. But it was a different kind of silence. The kind that holds shared understanding. Clara had lost a husband. Ethan had lost a whole world. Both of them were here now, in this simple house on the prairie, bound by losses they couldn't undo. Thomas coughed, a wet sound that made Clara's heart clench. She helped him sit up slightly, rubbed his back until the coughing eased. When she looked up, Ethan was watching. "There's medicine in town," he said. "Doc Brennan keeps some. I'll ride in tomorrow." "I can't pay. Didn't ask for payment." His tone cut off argument. "Boy needs medicine. He'll have it." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't understand you." "Don't need to." He stood, stretching his back with a slight grimace. "I'll bank the fire. Keep it going through the night. You need anything, call out." He moved around the room, checking the door bolt, adjusting the damper on the stove, adding wood to the fireplace. His movements were those of a man following a long routine. Clara wondered how many nights he'd done exactly this, alone in the house with his ghosts. "The loft," she said as he headed for the door. "You're sure? We really are fine down here." He paused, hand on the latch. "Boy needs a proper bed. Helps the breathing. Being elevated. There's a window up there, too. Fresh air helps with fever." Always practical reasons. Never admitting to kindness. Clara was beginning to understand that about him. Everything had to be logical, sensible. Emotion was a luxury he didn't allow himself. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "Ethan," he corrected. "We're not in town. No need for formality." "Ethan?" she repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue. She'd called James by his given name, of course. But that was different. They'd been married. This was... She didn't know what this was. He nodded once and left, pulling the door firmly shut behind him. Clara heard his footsteps crossing the yard, the barn door opening and closing, then quiet again, broken only by the pop of wood in the fire and Thomas's labored breathing. She looked around the room with new eyes. This morning she'd been prepared to die on the prairie, to hold her son as they both slipped away under the endless sky. Now she sat in a warm house with food in her belly and the promise of medicine tomorrow. The reversal was so complete she could hardly grasp it. Moving carefully, she gathered Thomas in her arms. He was so light, like carrying a bundle of twigs. The ladder to the loft was sturdy, each rung worn smooth by use. She climbed slowly, her skirts tangling, Thomas's weight making her arms ache. The loft was simple, a bed with a corn husk mattress, a small table, a trunk pushed against the wall. The window Ethan had mentioned looked out over the prairie, now silver under rising moon. Everything was clean, austere, a space waiting to be filled. Clara laid Thomas on the bed, arranged the blankets around him. He seemed to breathe easier. As Ethan had predicted, she sat beside him, one hand on his chest, feeling the rise and fall. "We're safe," she whispered, though he was past hearing. "We're safe for tonight." Through the window, she could see a light in the barn. Ethan, keeping watch over his mare, a man who understood vigils, who knew the weight of helpless watching. Perhaps that's why he'd taken them in, not from pity or want, but from recognition. He saw his own past grief in their present struggle. Clara allowed herself to lie down beside Thomas, still fully dressed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept in a real bed. The corn husks rustled as she moved, releasing a sweet, dusty scent. Clean sheets, recently washed. He'd prepared for guests he didn't know were coming, or maybe he always kept the room ready. A habit from when he'd had a family, perhaps. She thought she wouldn't sleep. Too much had happened. Too much was uncertain. But her body, pushed beyond its limits, had other ideas. Between one breath and the next, exhaustion took her. Her last conscious thought was of Ethan's face when he'd spoken his son's name, the careful blankness that covered old pain like boards over a well. She understood that kind of covering. Understood, too, the danger of removing those boards, of looking too long into depths that held nothing but darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She'd have to prove her worth, earn their keep, navigate this strange arrangement with a man who offered charity but called it practicality. But tonight, for these few hours, she could rest. The moon climbed higher, flooding the loft with cold light. In the barn, Ethan kept his vigil. In the house, Clara slept beside her son, her hand still resting on his chest, counting heartbeats even in dreams. And somewhere between them, in the spaces between words and the weight of unspoken understanding, something fragile began to grow. It wasn't trust, not yet. Trust took time, took testing, but it was possibility. The possibility that two broken people might find, if not healing, then at least a way to carry their breaks with dignity. The possibility that kindness given without expectation might be received without suspicion. The prairie winds sang around the house, found no cracks to enter. Inside, the fire burned steady. For tonight, that was enough. The fever broke just before dawn, leaving Thomas drenched in sweat and shivering. Clara had dozed fitfully through the night, jerking awake each time his breathing changed, each time he moaned or thrashed in his delirium. Now she felt his forehead, cool and clammy instead of burning. Relief made her dizzy. "Mama?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it was lucid, present. "I'm here, baby, right here." She smoothed his damp hair back, blinking away tears. "How do you feel?" "Hungry," he said, and Clara laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in months. Hunger meant life. Hunger meant hope. The house below was quiet, but she could smell coffee brewing. True to his word, Ethan had kept the fire going through the night. She wrapped Thomas in the dry blanket and carried him down the ladder, her legs shaky with exhaustion and relief. Ethan stood at the stove, his back to them. He'd changed clothes, but looked like he hadn't slept. Straw clung to his shirt. He'd been in the barn all night then. He turned at the sound of their descent, his eyes going immediately to Thomas. "Fever broke," Clara said unnecessarily. He nodded, poured coffee into 2 cups. Mare foaled, difficult birth, but both made it through. He set 1 cup on the table for her, then ladled water into a pot. "Boy needs broth, nothing heavy yet." Clara settled Thomas by the fire, then took the offered coffee gratefully. It was strong enough to strip paint, exactly as he'd requested. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling almost human again. "A foal?" Thomas's weak voice carried across the room. "Can I see?" "When you're stronger." Ethan said. He added salt and a handful of something dried to the pot. "Few days, maybe." Clara watched him work, noting the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. "You were up all night." Mare needed watching. He stirred the pot with the same careful attention he gave everything, like the boy needed watching. Sometimes that's all you can do. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Clara thought of him sitting in the barn, hands ready to help if needed, but knowing that some battles had to be fought alone, just as she'd sat beside Thomas, unable to do more than witness his struggle. "I should have helped," she said. "With the mare. You had your own watch to keep." He found a smaller pot, poured some of the broth into it. "This needs to cool some before he drinks it." They fell into a rhythm without discussing it. Clara found bread, sliced it thin for Thomas to soak in the broth when it cooled. Ethan fried eggs and thick slices of bacon. The domestic ordinariness of it felt surreal after weeks of desperation. Thomas managed to drink half the broth and eat a few bites of soaked bread before exhaustion took him again. But it was real sleep now, not the restless thrashing of fever. Clara tucked him into a makeshift bed by the fire, using the extra blankets to create a nest. "I'll ride to town for that medicine," Ethan said, pulling on his coat. Be gone most of the day. There's food enough. Don't let him eat too much at once." "I know," Clara said softly. "I've seen fever before." He paused at the door. "Lock this behind me. Don't open for anyone you don't know." The warning sent a chill down her spine. "Are you expecting trouble?" "No. But I don't expect most things that happen." He settled his hat on his head. "There's a shotgun above the door. You know how to use one?" "Yes," James had taught her. Insisted on it. One of the few practical things he'd done. "Good." He left without further comment, and Clara dutifully barred the door behind him. The house felt different without him in it. Larger somehow, and more empty. Clara moved quietly, not wanting to wake Thomas. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, tried to make herself useful. The simple acts felt like reclaiming part of herself. She'd been a keeper of homes once, before everything fell apart. As morning stretched toward noon, she found herself exploring cautiously, not snooping exactly, but trying to understand the man who'd taken them in. The main room held little personality-functional furniture, basic necessities, but there were telling details. Books on a shelf, well-read, a Bible, but also volumes on agriculture, horse breeding, mechanics. A man who believed in knowledge, in understanding how things worked. The trunk in the loft, when she went up to strip the sweat-soaked sheets, drew her attention, but she didn't open it. Whatever memories Ethan kept locked away were his own business. She remade the bed with fresh linens found in a cupboard, aired out the room. Thomas woke around midday, stronger but still weak. She fed him more broth, a little bread. He asked about the horses, about the man who'd helped them. Children, Clara reflected, adapted so much faster than adults. Thomas had accepted their changed circumstances without question, simply grateful for warmth and food. "His name is Mr. Carter," she told him, wiping his face with a damp cloth. He's giving us a place to stay for a while." "Is he nice?" Clara considered the question. Nice seemed too small a word for what Ethan was. "He's good," she said finally. "There's a difference." Thomas nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to his 4-year-old mind. Maybe it did. Children often understood the important things better than adults. The afternoon dragged. Clara found mending in a basket, shirts with torn seams, socks wearing thin. She set to work, grateful for something to occupy her hands. The needle flashed in the sunlight streaming through the window. Such a normal thing. Mending clothes. She'd thought she might never do normal things again. It was near sunset when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Clara's stomach clenched. She set aside the mending, moved to the window. 3 riders, none of them Ethan. They stopped at the gate, talking among themselves. One dismounted, started toward the house. Clara's heart hammered as she reached for the shotgun above the door. It was heavier than she remembered, but she'd held heavier burdens. The knock, when it came, was sharp and demanding. "Open up. We know someone's in there." Clara said nothing, hoping they'd leave, but the knocking came again. Harder. "We saw the smoke, lady, and Carter's horse is gone. Open the door or we'll open it for you." "State your business," Clara called, trying to keep her voice steady. Laughter, ugly and knowing. "Our business is with whoever's hiding in there. Carter owes us from a card game. Figured we'd collect while he's gone." Clara knew a lie when she heard one. These men hadn't come for money. They'd been watching, waiting for Ethan to leave, which meant they'd known she and Thomas were here. The thought made her skin crawl. "Mr. Carter left instructions," she said loudly. "No visitors. Mr. Carter ain't here, is he?" Different voice, oilier than the first. "Come on, sweetheart. We just want to talk. See what kind of woman's got Carter playing house all sudden." Thomas stirred by the fire, whimpering. Clara's hands tightened on the shotgun. These men would not enter this house, would not come near her son. "You've got 10 seconds to get off this property," she said, surprised by the steel in her voice. "Then I start shooting." More laughter. "You hear that, boys? Carter's woman's got teeth. The doorknob rattled. Too bad this lock ain't much. Jake, go around back. Tom, check the windows. Clara's mind raced. 3 men, probably armed. 1 door. Windows that didn't lock properly. Thomas too weak to run. And Ethan miles away. Not expected back until dark. She made her decision. Aimed the shotgun at the door about chest height and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening in the small space. Wood splintered outward, and she heard cursing and scrambling feet. Not hit then, but warned. She broke the gun open. Fumbled for shells she prayed were nearby. Found them in a box on the shelf, loaded with shaking hands. Crazy witch! The voice was further away now. Angry, but wary. You could have killed someone. That's the idea. Clara shouted back, Next one won't be a warning. She heard them arguing among themselves. One wanted to rush the house. Another counseled caution. The third, the oily-voiced one, suggested waiting until dark. The debate gave her time to think, to plan. Mama, Thomas's voice, high and scared. It's all right, baby. Just some men who got lost. They're leaving now. She kept her eyes on the door. The gun ready, but they weren't leaving. She could hear them moving around outside, testing windows, looking for weakness, like wolves circling a wounded deer. Clara's arms ached from holding the heavy gun, but she didn't dare lower it. Time crawled. The sun sank lower, sending long shadows across the floor. Thomas whimpered occasionally, but stayed quiet. Some instinct warning him this was not the time for tears. Clara's world narrowed to the door, the windows, the sounds outside. Then, hoofbeats, fast and hard, coming from the direction of town. The men outside heard it too. Their voices rose in alarm. Clara's heart leaped. Ethan? But he'd said he'd be gone until dark. Mount up, one of the men shouted. Move! Scrambling, cursing, the sound of horses being spurred hard. They were fleeing, but Clara kept the gun trained on the door until the hoofbeats faded in different directions. New footsteps. Running. Clara! Ethan's voice, sharp with something she'd never heard from him before. Fear. Open the door! She fumbled with the bar, her hands clumsy with relief. The door swung open and there he was, pistol in hand, eyes scanning for threats. He took in the shotgun in her hands, the hole blown in his door. Her white face. You hurt? His free hand gripped her shoulder. Checking for injuries. No, we're fine. They didn't get in. The words tumbled out. 3 men. Said you owed them money, but that was a lie. They were watching, waiting for you to leave. His jaw tightened. Bowers' men. Thought I recognized the horses heading out. He gently took the shotgun from her trembling hands. You did good. I shot your door, Clara said, hysteria bubbling up. I'm sorry about your door. Doors can be fixed. He moved past her, checking on Thomas. Then, each window, satisfied. He holstered his pistol. I ran into Doc Brennan in town. He mentioned seeing strangers asking about newcomers. Got a bad feeling and rode back hard. Clara sank into a chair, the strength going out of her legs. Who's Bowers? Man who thinks he owns this whole valley. Wants my water rights. I've said no. Ethan's voice was matter of fact, but Clara heard the steel underneath. Guess he figured having a woman here made me vulnerable. I'm sorry. We brought trouble. No. The word cut her off. Bowers has been circling for months. This was just his latest excuse. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small bottle. Medicine for the boy. Doc says 3 drops in water, 4 times a day. Clara took the bottle, marveling that he'd still thought of it after racing back to danger. Thank you. You defended my home, Ethan said quietly. Our home, for now. I should thank you. Our home. The words settled into Clara's chest, warm and unexpected. Not charity, not sufferance, but something shared. I'll teach you to shoot better, he continued. That scatter pattern was too wide, effective for scaring. But if they'd rushed... He shook his head. Tomorrow we start lessons. Clara nodded, understanding. This was his way practical response to emotional situations. He wouldn't speak of fear or relief or the way his hands had shaken slightly when checking her for injuries. But he'd teach her to protect herself better. In Ethan's world, that was worth more than words. "They'll be back," she said. It wasn't a question. Probably. He set about making the damaged door secure for the night, wedging a chair under the handle. "But they'll think twice now. Bowers likes easy targets. You showed them we're not that. There it was again." Clara watched him work. This quiet man who'd raced back from town because of a feeling, who'd taken in strangers and now included them in his standing against whatever came. "I'll make supper," she said, needing to do something useful. "I'll help." Thomas piped up from his nest by the fire. "I'm stronger now." Ethan looked at the boy, and Clara saw something shift in his face, a softening, quickly hidden. "Good," he said. "Strong is good. But rest tonight. Tomorrow you can help." They worked together in the kitchen, Ethan and Clara, while Thomas dozed again. Neither spoke of the men or the danger or what might come next. But something had changed between them. The careful distance Ethan maintained had cracked, just a little. And Clara, who'd stood ready to kill to protect this borrowed home, understood that she'd crossed her own line. She wasn't just sheltering here anymore. She was standing ground. Their ground. The thought should have frightened her. More danger. More uncertainty. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced since James died. She felt like she belonged somewhere again. The days that followed fell into a pattern as natural as breathing. Clara woke before dawn to make coffee, strong and black, the way Ethan liked it. He'd already be moving about, checking the horses, starting the endless round of chores that kept a homestead running. They'd share a quiet breakfast, Thomas chattering between them when he felt strong enough, then separate to their tasks. The medicine worked its slow magic. Each day Thomas kept down more food, stayed awake longer, asked more questions. By the end of the first week, he was following Ethan to the barn, watching wide-eyed as the man worked with the horses. The new foal, all legs and curiosity, became Thomas's particular fascination. "Can I touch him?" Thomas asked one morning, stretching his small hand toward the foal's soft nose. "Her," Ethan corrected gently. "And yes, but slow. Let her smell you first." Clara watched from the barn door as her son carefully approached the foal, mimicking Ethan's calm movements. The sight of them together, the large, quiet man and the small, eager boy, made something twist in her chest. Thomas hadn't had a father's guidance in months, had almost forgotten what it looked like. "Mama, look, she likes me." Thomas's joy was pure and uncomplicated as the foal lipped at his fingers. "Course she does," Ethan said. "Animals know good people." It was more words than he usually strung together. Clara noticed he talked more around Thomas, as if the boy's innocence loosened something in him. Not much. Ethan would never be a chatterer, but enough to matter. The work was hard but satisfying. Clara threw herself into it with desperate gratitude. She mended everything that needed mending, scrubbed the house until it shone, cooked meals from the simple supplies available. Beans and salt pork became a dozen different dishes under her hands. She found wild greens growing near the stream, added them to their diet, set snares for rabbits, the way James had taught her. Ethan noticed everything, acknowledged it with nods and the occasional good, high praise from him. He kept his promise about teaching her to shoot. Every afternoon, they'd set up targets behind the barn, old cans, pieces of wood. He showed her how to brace the shotgun properly, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze rather than jerk the trigger. "Don't close your eyes," he said, standing behind her, adjusting her stance. "You can't hit what you can't see." His hands on her shoulders were impersonal, teaching hands. But Clara felt their warmth through her dress, noticed how he was careful to touch only where necessary. A respectful man, maintaining proper distance even while ensuring she could defend herself. "Why do you think they haven't come back?" she asked after successfully hitting 3 cans in a row. "Bowers men?" "Waiting," Ethan said, seeing if I'll get careless again. Or maybe hoping I'll get tired of the vigilance and sell. He reloaded the shotgun, handed it back to her. He doesn't know me well if he thinks that. Clara thought of the books on his shelf. The careful way he planned everything. You're not a man who gives up easy. Neither are you. He set up new targets. Again. The town visits became routine too. Once a week. Ethan would ride in for supplies. He started taking Thomas when the boy grew strong enough, letting him ride in front on the big bay gelding. Clara stayed behind, keeping watch. She told herself she didn't mind, that someone needed to guard the homestead. But the truth was harder. She wasn't ready to face the stares and whispers of town folks. Not yet. Brought you something, Thomas announced one day, producing a peppermint stick from his pocket. Mister, Ethan bought it, but I picked it out. Clara looked over her son's head at Ethan, who was unpacking flour and coffee. Thank you, she said softly. He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. Boy said you liked sweet things. It was such a small gesture, but it nearly undid her. When had someone last thought of what she might like? Not need, not require for survival, but simply enjoy? She tucked the candy away like treasure. The nights were the hardest. After Thomas was abed, the house grew too quiet. Clara would sit by the fire, mending or reading one of Ethan's books by lamplight. He'd work on leather or wood, creating useful things with patient hands. Sometimes they'd talk. Careful, surface conversations about the work, the weather, Thomas's progress. Sometimes they sat in silence that was almost but not quite comfortable. She learned things in those quiet evenings. That he'd fought in the war, though he didn't say which side. That he'd grown up in Missouri, left young. That he'd taught himself to read from the Bible and whatever books he could trade for. Small facts dropped like breadcrumbs, never enough to form a full picture. In return, she told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents' death when she was 17, about meeting James at a church social, safe stories, nothing too revealing. They were like two people dancing at arm's length, careful not to step on each other's toes. One evening, Thomas's fever returned. Not as bad as before, but enough to send Clara into panic. She sat by his bed, cool cloth on his forehead, whispering prayers she wasn't sure she believed anymore. Ethan appeared at the loft ladder. How is he? Hot, not like before, but... Her voice cracked. He climbed up, felt Thomas's forehead with a practiced hand. Just the tail end of the sickness working out. Seen it before. He settled on the floor, back against the wall. I'll sit with you a spell. You don't have to. I know. They kept vigil together, not talking. When Thomas whimpered, Ethan was the one who thought to open the window wider, letting in cool night air. When Clara's eyes drooped, he took the cloth from her hands, continued the cooling routine. Daniel fought it for 3 days, he said suddenly, voice low. The fever. Sarah was already gone, but I thought if I could save him. Maybe I could bear it. Stayed by him every minute. Prayed till my voice gave out. He wrung out the cloth. Precise movements in the dim light. Didn't matter. Fever took him anyway. Clara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Not looking for pity. Just saying, I know the watching. Know how it feels to bargain with God for a child's life. He touched Thomas's cheek gently. This one's strong. He'll make it through. How do you know? Because he's got you, and you won't let him go. Simple words, but they carried certainty. Saw it in your eyes that first day. Same look a she-wolf gets defending pups. That's stronger than any fever. Clara studied his profile in the moonlight. The scar on his jaw caught the silver light, and she wondered again about its origin. So many stories written on his body, most of them painful. Yet here he sat, offering comfort drawn from his own worst loss. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not making me do this alone. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, nobody should have to watch alone. By morning, Thomas's fever had broken again, this time for good. Clara woke to find herself slumped against the wall, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Ethan was gone, but she could hear him moving about downstairs, starting the day's routine. She found him at the stove, making breakfast. You should have woken me. You needed the sleep. He poured her coffee without looking up. Boy's asking for food. That's good. They fell back into routine, but something had shifted. The careful distance remained, but it felt different now. Less like walls, more like courtesy. Like two people being gentle with each other's bruises. Thomas recovered quickly after that, resilient as only children could be. Within days, he was helping with chores, chattering about the horses, making plans for all he'd do when he was all the way strong. His favorite time was the evening, when Ethan would sometimes tell stories about horses he'd trained or places he'd seen. Simple stories. Nothing fancy, but Thomas hung on every word. "Mr. Ethan, will you teach me to ride?" he asked one night. "When I'm bigger." Clara started to redirect him. They couldn't impose so much. Couldn't assume they'd be here when Thomas was bigger. But Ethan answered before she could. "If you're here and willing to learn, I'll teach you." Such a careful answer. If you're here, not promising a future, but not closing the door either. Clara wondered if he felt it too, this fragile thing building between them all. This not quite family held together by need and caution, and something that might, maybe, be becoming affection. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The threatened return of Bauer's men didn't materialize, though Ethan never relaxed his vigilance. Clara found herself jumping less at unexpected sounds, sleeping better at night. Even started humming while she worked, songs her mother had taught her. "That's pretty," Thomas said one day, looking up from where he was practicing letters on a slate Ethan had found. "Sing the words, Mama." She'd stopped, embarrassed. She hadn't realized she was humming aloud, but Thomas's eager face and even Ethan's glance from across the room encouraged her. So she sang, soft and hesitant at first, then stronger, an old hymn about finding rest in green pastures. When she finished, Thomas clapped. Ethan just nodded and went back to his work. But she caught him listening when she hummed after that, saw the way his hands would still for a moment, as if the melody had caught him off guard. "You have a gift," he said one evening, apropos of nothing. Clara looked up from her sewing. "What?" "Your voice. It's—" He searched for words, unusual for a man who used them so sparingly. "It makes the house feel different, fuller." Heat rose in her cheeks. "I'm disturbing your peace." "No." The word came quick and firm. "No, it's good. The house has been quiet too long." He went back to his whittling. Conversation apparently over, but Clara treasured the words, turned them over in her mind like smooth stones. The house had been quiet too long. Maybe that meant he wanted it to stay full. Maybe that meant they could stay. She was learning to read Ethan's silences, to understand the language of gesture and glance, the way he always checked the horizon when he stepped outside. Vigilance had become habit. How he touched his shoulder when rain was coming, the old injury acting as barometer, the almost smile that flickered when Thomas mastered something new. And he, she thought, was learning to read them too. He knew Thomas needed extra blankets on cold nights before the boy asked. Knew Clara worried when he was late from town. Started leaving notes about delays, small accommodations, barely noticeable unless you were watching for them. It wasn't love. Clara knew what love felt like, had loved James with young, hopeful passion. This was different, quieter, built on shared work and careful trust rather than sweet words and promises. But it was something, and it was growing stronger every day. "Mama," Thomas said one night as she tucked him in, "are we staying here forever?" Clara smoothed his hair, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know about forever, but we're staying for now." "Good. I like it here. I like Mr. Ethan. He's teaching me about horses." He yawned, already half asleep. "Do you like him too?" Such a simple question from a child's perspective. But Clara felt the weight of it. All the complications Thomas couldn't understand. "Yes," she said finally. "I like him too." It was true, she realized. Somewhere between that first desperate night and now. Gratitude had shifted into something warmer. She liked his steady presence, his careful kindness, the way he treated Thomas with patient respect, liked the way he included them in his life without making them feel beholden. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn. Ethan checking on the horses one last time, making sure all was secure, standing guard, as he did every night, as he'd been doing alone for years before they came. Clara made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd asked to go to town with them. It was time to stop hiding, time to be seen as part of this household rather than just sheltering in it. If Bowers's men were watching, let them see she wasn't cowering. Let the town gossip see that the widow Mitchell had found honest work and a safe place for her son. Let them see, too, that Ethan Carter was no longer alone. The thought scared her, the exposure, the judgment, the questions. But Ethan had given them sanctuary when they needed it most. The least she could do was stand beside him in public, head high, and dare anyone to question the arrangement, because that's what you did for people who mattered. You stood with them, even when standing was hard. You became part of their defense, as they'd become part of yours. You built something together, day by day, meal by meal, until suddenly you looked around and realized you'd made a home. The day Mason Jennings rode up to the homestead, Clara was hanging the wash on the line. The wet sheets snapped in the prairie wind like warnings, and she felt the change in the air before she heard the horses. 3 riders, moving slow and deliberate up the dusty track. Her hands stilled on the clothespins. Ethan was in the far pasture, mending fence. Thomas was in the barn, playing with the barn cat's new kittens. For a moment, Clara considered running for the shotgun, but the lead rider had already spotted her. Mason Jennings was exactly what she'd expected from a man who loaned money at crushing interest, soft where he should be hard, hard where he should be soft. His clothes were too fine for frontier life, his hands too clean for honest work, but his eyes were what made her skin crawl, pale blue and flat, like a snake's. "Mrs. Mitchell," he called, touching his hat brim in mockery of politeness. "What a pleasant surprise to find you here." Clara forced herself to continue hanging the sheet, movement steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Jennings, I thought our business was concluded when my husband died. Now, that's where you're wrong." He dismounted, his men staying on their horses but watchful. "Your husband died owing me considerable money. That debt doesn't just disappear." "I have nothing to pay you with," Clara said flatly. "As you well know." "Oh, I wouldn't say that." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her want to scrub her skin raw. "A pretty widow like yourself has assets, ways of working off what's owed." Clara's stomach turned. "The only work I do is honest work." "Honest," he laughed, an ugly sound. "Is that what you call spreading your legs for Carter, playing house with him while your husband's barely cold in the ground?" The crude words hit like a slap. Clara's hands clenched in the wet fabric. "Get off this property. This isn't your property. Mrs. Mitchell, you're just visiting." He stepped closer, and she could smell his pomade, sickeningly sweet. "But we could come to an arrangement. I'm a reasonable man. Transfer your debt to me personal-like, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. Better than whatever Carter's paying you for your services." "The lady asked you to leave." Ethan's voice came from behind the barn, cold and steady. He emerged leading his horse, rifle across the saddle. His expression was carved from stone, but Clara saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand hovered near his sidearm. Mason's smile widened. "Carter, we were just discussing business. No business here concerns you." Ethan moved to stand between Mason and Clara, a wall of quiet menace. "You've got 10 seconds to mount up. Now let's not be hasty." Mason raised his hands in false placation. "I've got a legal claim here. James Mitchell owed me $300. His widow inherits his debts along with everything else." "She inherited nothing but grief," Ethan said. "You picked his bones clean before he was even buried. Took their possessions, their home. What more do you want?" "What's owed me?" Mason's false friendliness dropped away. "One way or another. Show me the papers." Ethan demanded. "Legal documentation of this debt." Mason's smile turned sly. Papers got lost in a fire. Terrible tragedy. But everyone in town knows about the loan. My word against a dead man's. Then you've got nothing. I've got influence. Friends. Men who'll swear to what they know. Mason's eyes glittered with malice. Course, if the widow was under the protection of someone respectable like married proper, that'd be different. A husband assumes his wife's debts. After all, Clara understood suddenly. This wasn't about money. It was about possession. Mason wanted her. Had probably wanted her since James first brought her to town. The debt was just leverage. You're talking in circles. Ethan said, Say what you mean or get out. I mean that I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits. Mason looked past Ethan to Clara. You can't hide here forever, sweetheart. Sooner or later, you'll have to face what's owed. And when that day comes, I'll be waiting. Thomas chose that moment to burst from the barn, face bright with excitement. Mama, Mr. Ethan, the gray kitten opened its... He stopped short. Seeing the strangers, his small body tensed, moving instinctively closer to Clara. Mason's smile turned predatory. Well, the boy's looking healthier than last I saw him. Growing up fast. Be a shame if something happened to slow that down. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Clara's vision edged with red. She grabbed Thomas, pulling him behind her, mother fury overriding fear. But it was Ethan who moved. Fast as a striking snake, he had Mason by the shirt front, lifting the smaller man onto his toes. You threaten that boy again, he said, voice deadly quiet. And I'll forget I'm trying to be civilized. Mason's men reached for their guns, but Ethan's rifle was already pointed their way, held one-handed with unnerving steadiness. Easy now, Mason wheezed, but his eyes sparked with satisfaction. He'd gotten a reaction, found a weakness. No harm meant, just observing. Ethan released him with a controlled shove. Mason stumbled back, straightening his clothes with shaking hands. This isn't over, he said. The law's on my side. The law's in town. Ethan replied, Out here, there's just what a man will and won't stand for. I won't stand for you on my land again. Mason mounted his horse with difficulty, trying to salvage dignity. We'll see about that. Mrs. Mitchell, you think on what I said. My offer won't stand forever. They watched the three riders disappear into the prairie heat. Only when the dust settled did Ethan lower his rifle. His hands, Clara noticed, trembled slightly. Pack what you need, he said abruptly. You and the boy. I'll take you to the stage station tomorrow. There's family back east you can... No. The word surprised them both. Clara lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. I'm not running again. Clara. He'll follow. You know he will. Men like that don't give up when they think they own something. She pulled Thomas closer, felt him burrow into her skirts. At least here, I know where I stand. You don't understand. Mason's got Judge Thornton in his pocket. If he pushes this debt claim, then we'll fight it. We? Ethan's voice held something she couldn't identify. This isn't your fight, isn't it? Clara felt tears threaten, but refused to let them fall. You took us in, fed us, gave us shelter and safety and... She stopped, unable to name the other things he'd given. Hope, dignity, a reason to keep going. You think I'd repay that by bringing trouble to your door and then running. You're not bringing trouble. Mason is... Same result. She took a breath, steadying herself. I meant what I said that first night. I'll work for our keep. And if that work means standing against men like Mason Jennings, then that's what I'll do. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Behind them, Thomas made a small sound of distress. Without looking away from Clara, Ethan reached down and lifted the boy, settling him on his hip with practiced ease. You scared, son? Thomas nodded, face buried in Ethan's shoulder. That's all right. Being scared's natural when bad men come around. But you know what? What? Thomas's voice was muffled. Your mama's about the bravest person I know. And brave people don't run from bullies like Mr. Jennings. They stand up to them. He looked at Clara over Thomas's head. Even when standing is hard. Clara's throat tightened. He was using her own thoughts. reflected back like a mirror. When had he learned to read her so well? "We'll need to be careful," Ethan continued, still holding her gaze. "Mason won't take today well. He'll try again, different angles. Then we'll be ready." Clara said, "We," he repeated. And this time, she heard what lay beneath the word. Acceptance. Partnership. Something that might, eventually, become more. "Come on," he said, shifting Thomas to a more comfortable position. "Let's get inside. We need to plan." They spent the evening discussing options. Ethan knew the law better than Clara expected. Turned out he'd studied it some, preparing for his own battles with Bowers. Mason's claim was shaky without documentation, but not impossible, especially with a sympathetic judge. "Best defense is to make you a less attractive target," Ethan said, after Thomas had been put to bed. "Mason likes easy prey. Make it hard enough. He might decide it's not worth the trouble." "How do we do that?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Could make his threat work against him. He said a husband assumes a wife's debts. Clara's breath caught. "Ethan, just thinking practical." He didn't look at her. "A business arrangement. Protection for you and Thomas. Help for me with the homestead. Wouldn't have to be. That is, I wouldn't expect." "Stop." Clara waited until he met her eyes. "Don't offer things you don't mean. I don't offer anything lightly." They stared at each other across the kitchen table. So much unspoken between them. Growing affection. Careful trust. The ghost of losses that made new connections frightening. But also this. A solid partnership built on mutual respect and shared work. Maybe that was enough foundation for what he was suggesting. "It's not fair to you," Clara said finally. "Saddling you with another man's debts, another man's family. You're not another man's anything." Ethan said firmly, "You're your own woman, making your own choices. And Thomas," his voice softened, "that boy deserves a chance to grow up safe, to learn what kind of man he wants to be. And you, what do you deserve?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, maybe to not be alone anymore. The simple honesty of it broke her heart. This man who'd carved out a life from nothing, who'd survived loss that would have destroyed others, admitting to loneliness, offering marriage not from passion or romance, but from something deeper, the recognition of kindred damage, the hope that two broken people might make something whole. "I need to think," Clara said. "Course." He stood, suddenly awkward. "Take all the time you need. Offer stands regardless." She watched him bank the fire, check the locks, perform his nightly rituals. When he turned to leave for the barn, he still slept there most nights. Maintaining propriety, she stopped him. "Ethan, thank you for standing with us today." He paused at the door. "Always will," he said simply, and left. Clara sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the prairie wind. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn. Ethan standing guard, as always. But now she understood it differently. Not just habit or caution, but care, protecting what mattered to him. When had she and Thomas become something that mattered? She thought of Mason's pale eyes, his casual threat against her son. Thought of the other vultures who'd circle if word got out she was unprotected. A widow with a child was prey in this harsh land. That was simple fact. But Ethan offered more than protection. He offered dignity, partnership, a chance to build something lasting. Not love, maybe, not yet, but respect and affection and the possibility of more. Clara made her decision. Tomorrow, she'd give him her answer. Tonight, she'd allow herself to imagine a future where Thomas called Ethan Papa, where she sang while cooking in a kitchen that was truly hers, where two damaged people built something strong enough to weather any storm. It wasn't the romantic dream she'd had as a young bride, but it was real, solid as the house around her. And maybe that was better than dreams. Maybe that was enough to say yes. The rifle felt heavier than Clara remembered. She stood in the yard, afternoon sun beating down, trying to hold it steady the way Ethan had shown her. Her arms ached, but she didn't lower the weapon, not with him watching, patient and silent beside her. Breathe, he said quietly. You're fighting it. Work with the rifle, not against it. Clara forced her shoulders to relax, found the rhythm he'd been trying to teach her. In, out, squeeze between breaths. When the body was most still, the tin can 50 yards away seemed impossibly small. When you're ready, Ethan said. She fired. The can spun off the fence post with a satisfying clang. Clara couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. Better, Ethan acknowledged. Again. They'd been at this for an hour every afternoon since Mason's visit 2 weeks prior. Clara's hands had blistered, then calloused. Her shoulder bore a permanent bruise from the rifle's kick, but she was hitting more than she missed now. And that felt like victory. Mama! Did you hit it? Thomas called from the porch, where he was supposed to be practicing his letters. She did, Ethan answered, setting up another target. But lessons aren't done yet. Neither are yours. Thomas groaned, but bent back to his slate. The boy had taken to calling Ethan Sir lately, not quite Papa, but moving in that direction. Clara saw how it affected Ethan each time, the tiny pause before he responded, as if savoring the sound. She'd given him her answer the morning after Mason's threats, a simple yes over breakfast, nothing fancy. He'd nodded, finished his coffee, and said they'd go to town when she was ready. No fuss, no grand declarations, just acceptance of a practical arrangement that might, given time, become something more. They hadn't been to town yet. Ethan wanted her confident with weapons first, able to defend herself if needed. Clara suspected he also wanted time to prepare the town for their news, maybe, or to shore up his own defenses against the gossip that would follow. Try the moving target, he said now, producing a rope with several cans attached. I'll pull it across. You track and fire when ready. This was harder. Clara missed the first 2 shots, frustration building. But Ethan just reset the targets, patient as stone. On the 3rd try, she clipped 1 can, sending it spinning. Good, you're anticipating less. He coiled the rope, considering. Tomorrow we'll work on firing from different positions, kneeling, behind cover. You're preparing me for war, Clara observed. I'm preparing you for whatever comes. He met her eyes steadily. Mason's been too quiet. That worries me more than threats. Clara had noticed it too. No sign of the moneylender or his men. The quiet felt like a held breath, waiting to be released. But she'd also noticed other things. How Ethan had started wearing his sidearm, even for barn chores. The way he'd reinforced the shutters, stocked extra ammunition. He was preparing for a siege. You think he'll come back, she said, not a question. I think men like Mason don't give up. They just change tactics. He took the rifle from her, checking it with automatic movements. But that's tomorrow's worry. You did good today. Praise from Ethan was rare and precious. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest, quickly suppressed. This was a business arrangement, she reminded herself. Protection and partnership, nothing more. The fact that she looked forward to these afternoon lessons, to his quiet presence and steady guidance, was beside the point. I'll start supper, she said. I'll help Thomas with his letters. Boy's been staring at that slate for an hour without writing much. It was so domestic, so normal, that Clara had to turn away to hide her expression. When had this started feeling like a real family? When had Ethan's offer of protection become something she actually wanted, not just needed? Inside, she busied herself with meal preparation. Through the window, she could see Ethan sitting with Thomas on the porch, large hands guiding small ones in forming letters. Thomas was chattering about something, the horses, probably, and Ethan was listening with grave attention. You're getting soft, she told herself, but there was no heat in it. Maybe soft wasn't wrong. Maybe, after months of hardness just to survive, a little softness was allowed. The next morning brought a visitor, but not the one they expected. Clara was feeding the chickens when she saw the buggy approaching, a woman driving alone, which was unusual enough to make her wary. But as the buggy drew closer, she recognized Mrs. Henderson from town, the minister's wife, a force of nature wrapped in bombazine and propriety. Mrs. Mitchell, the woman called, climbing down with surprising agility for her size. I hope I'm not intruding. Clara set aside the feed bucket, acutely aware of her patched dress and work-roughened hands. Mrs. Henderson, what brings you out here? Curiosity, the older woman said bluntly. And concern. May we speak privately? Clara glanced toward the barn, where Ethan was working. He'd heard the buggy, would be watching. She felt safer knowing that. Of course. Would you like some coffee? That would be lovely. They sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Ethan had offered marriage 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes took in everything. The neat house, the evidence of a woman's touch, Thomas's slate on the sideboard. I'll be direct, Mrs. Henderson said after the pleasantries were observed. The entire town is talking about your arrangement with Mr. Carter. Clara's spine stiffened. I work for Mr. Carter. He's provided employment and shelter for myself and my son. Yes, that's what he told my husband, very firmly. I might add. The woman's expression softened slightly. Mr. Carter is a good man, quiet, keeps to himself, but reliable. When he says something, people believe it. But Mason Jennings is telling a different story, one that paints you in a compromising light. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. I've come to hear your side. Clara considered her options. This woman could be an ally or an enemy, depending on what she chose to share. My husband died owing Mr. Jennings money we'd borrowed to try to make the farm work. When James passed, Jennings took everything, the house, the land, even our furniture. He would have taken more if I'd let him. Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. Ah, that kind of debt. Thomas and I were starving when Mr. Carter took us in. He asked for nothing improper, expected only honest work in return. He's been... Clara searched for words. He's been everything honorable and kind. And now... Clara lifted her chin. Now Jennings is making threats. Against me, against my son, Mr. Carter has offered his protection in the form of marriage, a business arrangement, for the safety of all concerned. Mrs. Henderson studied her for a long moment. Do you care for him, Ethan? The question caught Clara off guard. I respect him greatly. That's not what I asked. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. What I feel or don't feel is less important than keeping my son safe. The woman sat back, decision made. Well then, when is the wedding? We haven't... Saturday. Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He stood there, hat in hand. Having entered so quietly, neither woman heard him. If that suits Clara. Clara's heart jumped. That's 4 days away. Time enough to make it proper. He said, Mrs. Henderson, I'd appreciate your help with arrangements. Simple ceremony, nothing fancy, but proper, legal, binding. The minister's wife smiled for the first time. Mr. Carter, I would be delighted, and I'll make sure the right people know the truth of things. Mason Jennings won't find many sympathetic ears once I'm done. Clara watched this unexpected alliance form with amazement. Mrs. Henderson, champion of propriety, taking their side against the gossip. Ethan, who avoided town whenever possible, actively seeking social support, all for her protection. Thank you, she managed. Nonsense. I've no patience for men who prey on widows and orphans. Mrs. Henderson stood. All business now. Saturday, 2 o'clock. I'll handle the details. Clara, you'll need a dress. Do you have... She'll have what she needs. Ethan interrupted quietly. After Mrs. Henderson left in a flurry of plans and promises. Clara found herself alone with Ethan in the kitchen. The reality of what they'd just agreed to sat between them like a third presence. Saturday, she said. Too soon? No, this is really happening. He moved closer, still careful not to crowd her. You can still say no, right up to the moment. I won't hold it against you. I know, she met his eyes. I won't say no. Something flickered in his expression. Relief? Pleasure? It was gone too quickly to identify. Good, That's good. They stood there, awkward as teenagers, neither sure what came next. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. I should get back to work. Yes, me too. But neither moved. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the air charged with possibility. Clara found herself studying his face, the strong lines softened by afternoon light. When had she memorized the exact shade of his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead? Clara, he said, then stopped. Tried again. After Saturday, you'll have the house. I'll keep to the barn. Like now, nothing has to change that you don't want changed. She understood what he was offering. Marriage in name only, unless she chose otherwise. The same careful respect he'd shown from the beginning. But something in her rebelled at the idea. Ethan, she said, then lost her nerve. What could she say? That she was beginning to want things she hadn't expected, that his quiet strength had become necessary to her days, that when he smiled at Thomas, her heart did dangerous things. It's all right, he said, reading her struggle. We'll figure it out as we go, like everything else. He left then, and Clara sank into a chair. 4 days. In 4 days. She'd be Clara Carter. The name felt foreign on her tongue, but not unpleasant. A new name for a new life. Thomas burst through the door, face bright with excitement. Mama, Mister, Ethan says we're going to town Saturday. He says it's for something special, but won't say what. Do you know? Clara pulled her son close, breathing in his little boy scent of hay and sunshine. Yes, baby, I know. What is it? She considered how to explain. How would you feel about staying here permanent, about Mr. Ethan being part of our family? Thomas pulled back to study her face, suddenly serious. Like a papa? Yes, like that. The boy considered this with the gravity of childhood. Would he teach me to ride and help with letters and tell stories at night? I think so. Then yes. Simple as that for a 4-year-old heart. I'd like that. Mama, I think he's lonely sometimes. Like we were, out of the mouths of babes. Clara hugged him tighter, blinking back tears. I think you're right. Baby, I think we were all lonely. But not anymore. Thomas said confidently. Now we have each other. Now we have each other. Clara held on to those words as she went about the rest of her day. They echoed in her mind as she practiced with the rifle again, Ethan's hand steadying hers when she stumbled. They followed her through supper, through the quiet evening where she and Ethan sat by the fire, not talking but not needing to. Saturday would come with its own challenges. Mason wouldn't take the news well. The town would gossip. There would be adjustments, awkwardness, the slow navigation of a marriage built on necessity rather than romance. But Thomas was right. They had each other now, and maybe that was enough foundation for whatever came next. That night, Clara stood at her window, watching lamplight flicker in the barn. Tomorrow, Ethan would teach her to shoot from cover. The day after, they'd go to town for supplies and wedding preparations. Small steps toward a shared future neither had expected but both had chosen. She thought of Ethan's hands, patient and careful, guiding her aim, of his rare smiles when Thomas mastered something new, of the way he'd said Saturday with such certainty, as if he'd been waiting for the right moment to make them official. Maybe this wasn't the love story she'd dreamed of as a girl, but it was real, built on respect and trust and the 1,000 small kindnesses that made a life. And maybe, given time and tenderness, it could become everything she'd never dared hope for. Clara turned from the window, mind settled. Saturday. In 4 days. She'd take a new name and a new chance. She'd stand beside a good man and dare anyone, Mason Jennings included, to challenge what they built together. For tonight, that was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own victories, its own lessons. But tonight, she had a home, a future, and the promise of protection that went deeper than any legal document. Tonight, she had hope. The sun was dying in flames along the western horizon when they came. Clara had just called Thomas in for supper, was ladling stew into bowls when she heard it, the thunder of hooves. Too many and too fast for friendly visitors. Thomas, upstairs, now! Her voice came out steady despite the ice in her veins. But Mama, go! She grabbed the rifle from beside the door, checked the load. Thomas scrambled up the ladder to the loft, recognizing the urgency in her tone. Ethan burst through the door, pistol already drawn. 8 riders. Mason's brought friends. He moved to the window, peering out carefully. They're spreading out, trying to surround us. Clara's hands were steady as she took position at the other window. All those afternoons of practice crystallized into this moment. What do they want? What Mason always wanted, you, and to hurt me for standing in his way. Ethan's voice was grimly matter-of-fact. But they'll have to go through both of us first. Mr. Carter, Mason's voice carried across the yard, oily with false courtesy. Let's discuss this like civilized men. No need for anyone to get hurt. State your business from there. Ethan called back. You know my business. The widow owes me $300 or equivalent value. A pause, heavy with implication. I'm willing to negotiate. The only thing you'll get from this property is a bullet if you come closer, Clara shouted, surprising herself with the vehemence. Laughter from the men outside. Sounds like you've been teaching her your bad habits. Carter, women should know their place. My place is defending my home. Clara replied, and my family. Your home, Mason's voice sharpened. Last I heard, you were just hired help. Unless, understanding crept into his tone. Oh, this is rich. You actually married her, didn't you? Ethan Carter, taking another man's leavings. Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, but his voice remained level. My wife's debts are cleared. You've got no claim here. Your wife, Mason spat the words. A bill of sale by another name. Tell me, Carter, does she warm your bed as eagerly as she warmed her husband's, or do you have to— Ethan's shot cut off the vulgar speculation. It kicked up dust inches from Mason's horse, making the animal dance sideways. Next one won't miss, he said calmly. You just made a big mistake. Mason snarled. Boys, looks like we're doing this the hard way. Everything happened fast then. Windows shattered as bullets flew. Clara dropped below the sill, glass showering over her. She heard Thomas cry out upstairs and her heart clenched, but she couldn't go to him. Not yet. Stay down! Thomas! Ethan shouted. Under the bed! Clara rose just enough to sight through the broken window. A man was running toward the house, rifle raised. She squeezed the trigger like Ethan had taught her, feeling the kick against her shoulder. The man spun and fell, clutching his leg. Good shot, Ethan said, already firing at another target. The house filled with gun smoke and noise. Clara lost track of time, focused only on load. Aim. Fire. Repeat. Her world narrowed to the window. The rifle. The shapes of men trying to kill them. A cry from outside. Someone else hit. Were they winning? Losing? No way to tell in the chaos. Then, cutting through the gunfire, a sound that made Clara's blood freeze. Smoke. She smelled smoke. The barn, Ethan cursed. They fired the barn. The horses. The new foal Thomas loved, their livelihood going up in flames. But they couldn't leave the house, couldn't help. It was what Mason wanted to drive them into the open. Let it burn, Clara said fiercely. Buildings can be rebuilt. Ethan glanced at her, something like pride flashing across his face. Then he was moving, shooting, a deadly dance she struggled to match. A man appeared at the side window. Clara swung the rifle around, but he was too close, too fast. The gun crashed through the remaining glass, a face twisted with greed and violence behind it. She pulled the trigger, but the rifle just clicked. Empty. The man grinned, starting to climb through. Clara grabbed the hot barrel, swung it like a club. It connected with a satisfying crunch. The man howled, falling backward. Clara! Ethan tossed her his pistol, then grabbed another rifle. She'd never shot a pistol before, but there was no time to think. Point and squeeze. The revolver bucked in her hand. Miss. Again. Hit. The man at the window dropped. How many were left? The gunfire had slowed but not stopped. In the momentary lull, she heard Mason shouting orders, regrouping for another rush. They'll come all at once next time, Ethan said, reading the situation. We can't hold them if they... Hoofbeats, new ones, coming fast from town. Clara's heart sank. Reinforcements for Mason? They were barely holding on as it was, but the shooting from outside stopped abruptly. Confused shouts. Then Mason's voice, high with anger. "This is a private matter. Sheriff!" "Sheriff!" Clara nearly sobbed with relief. Help had come. "Private matter, my ass." Sheriff Coleman's voice boomed. "Half the town can see your barn fire. Now drop those weapons before I drop you." "We've got rights," one of Mason's men protested. "Carter shot first." "I've got 6 deputies who'll swear different," the sheriff replied. "Mrs. Henderson was quite insistent we ride out here. Something about stopping a murder before it happened. Seems she was right." Through the shattered window, Clara could see men throwing down guns, hands raising. Mason sat his horse, face twisted with rage, but even he wasn't fool enough to fight the law. "It's done," Ethan said quietly. "We're safe." Clara realized she was shaking. The pistol fell from numb fingers. "Thomas, I need... Go!" Ethan was already moving toward the door. "I'll handle this." Clara flew up the ladder. Thomas was under the bed as ordered, curled in a tight ball. "Baby, it's over. You're safe." He crawled out, launching himself into her arms. "I was scared, Mama, but I stayed quiet like Mister," Ethan said. "You were so brave." She held him tight, breathing him in, alive, safe, whole. Through the window, she could see the sheriff's men rounding up Mason's group. Ethan stood in the yard, steady as always, giving his account. The barn still burned, sending smoke and sparks into the darkening sky. But the house stood. They'd held. "Is it really over?" Thomas whispered. Clara thought of Mason's face, the hatred there. "This part is... yes." They climbed down to find the sheriff in the kitchen, taking in the damage. Broken windows, bullet holes in walls, blood on the floor. A war zone. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted. "Glad to see you're unhurt, both of you." "Mrs. Carter," still new enough to surprise her. "Thank you for coming." "Thank Mrs. Henderson. That woman burst into my office like avenging angels, demanding we ride out here immediately. Said she'd had a feeling all day something was wrong." He shook his head. "Good thing, too. This could have ended badly." "Will Mason be charged?" Clara had to know. "Assault, attempted murder, arson. He'll see trial." The sheriff's expression was grim. "Though with Judge Thornton, well, we'll see. But he won't be bothering you again soon, that's certain." Ethan returned, soot-streaked and tired. Lost the barn, saved the horses, though. Had just moved them to the far pasture this afternoon. He looked at Clara. "Like you said, buildings can be rebuilt. The sheriff left with his prisoners, promising to send men to help with cleanup." The sudden quiet felt strange after so much violence. Clara stood in a ruined kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and splintered wood, and felt victorious. "You all right?" Ethan asked quietly. "I shot men," she said, the reality hitting. "I might have killed." "You defended our home, our family." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Nothing wrong in that." "Our family." The words settled something in her chest. "Thomas was so brave. Like his..." She stopped, unsure. "Like his papa would want him to be," Ethan finished simply. Clara looked up at him. This man who'd stood with her against violence, who'd taught her to defend herself, who'd claimed her and Thomas as his own to protect. Her husband of just 3 days, still nearly a stranger in some ways, but not in the ways that mattered. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For..." He stopped her words the best way possible, with a kiss. Not their first. That had been a chaste brush of lips after the wedding ceremony. This was different, deeper. A claiming and a promise and a release of fear all at once. When they parted, Thomas was watching from the stairs, eyes wide. "Does this mean we're staying forever now?" Ethan lifted the boy, settling him on his hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What do you think? Want to help me rebuild that barn?" "Yes." Thomas threw his arms around Ethan's neck. And can we make it bigger? With a special stall for my foal? Your foal now, is it? But Ethan was almost smiling. I suppose we could manage that. Clara watched them, her boys, planning their future barn. The kitchen was a wreck. They'd lost buildings and nearly lost more. Mason would be back eventually, in court if not in person. There would be struggles ahead, but they'd stood together and won. More than that, they'd become what they'd been pretending to be. A family, forged in fire and determination. Clara? Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. You with us? She moved to join them, fitting herself against Ethan's side, one hand on Thomas's back. Always, she said, and meant it. Outside, the barn still smoldered, sending smoke signals into the star-filled sky. Tomorrow they'd clean up, start rebuilding, face whatever came next. But tonight, in their damaged but defended home, they were together, they were safe, they were family. And that was worth fighting for. The night after the battle lay heavy with the smell of smoke and gunpowder. Clara sat on the porch steps, cleaning the last of the glass cuts on her hands while Ethan boarded up the broken windows. Thomas had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's terror and its aftermath. That should hold until we can get proper glass, Ethan said, stepping back to examine his work. In the moonlight, she could see the exhaustion in the set of his shoulders, the way he favored his left side where a bullet had grazed him. Sit, Clara commanded, gesturing to the step beside her. Let me look at that wound. It's nothing. Ethan Carter, sit down. He obeyed, something almost like amusement flickering across his face. Yes, ma'am. Clara carefully peeled back his shirt, examining the furrow along his ribs. The bleeding had stopped, but it needed cleaning. She worked in silence, aware of his steady breathing, the warmth of his skin under her fingers. You fought well today, he said quietly, like you'd been doing it all your life. I had a good teacher. She tied off the bandage, but didn't move away. I was terrified every second. Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear, means acting despite it. His hand covered hers where it rested on his chest. You were brave, Clara, braver than most men I've known. She thought of the moment she'd swung that rifle like a club, the fierce determination to protect what was hers. They threatened my family, our family. There wasn't a choice. There's always a choice. You chose to stand and fight. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight she could see something raw in his expression. I need to tell you something. Clara's heart skipped. What is it? He reached into his pocket, pulled out something that gleamed dully in the low light. A ring, simple gold, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's, he said. Been carrying it since Sarah died. Never thought I'd have use for it again. Clara's breath caught. They'd married quickly, with a borrowed ring from Mrs. Henderson. This was different. This was Ethan choosing to give her something precious, something tied to his past. I know we married for practical reasons, he continued, words coming slow but steady. Protection, partnership. But somewhere between that first night and now, things changed, at least for me. He met her eyes. You're not just someone I'm protecting anymore. Clara, you're becoming everything. The words hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This man, who guarded his emotions like fort walls, was laying himself bare before her. Ethan, she whispered, but he wasn't finished. I watch you with Thomas, see how you've brought life back to this place, hear you singing while you work. And it's like the sun coming up after a long night. I didn't expect this. Didn't think I could feel this way again. But you and that boy have given me something I thought was lost forever. What's that? Her voice was barely audible. Hope, home, a reason to build instead of just survive. He held out the ring. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I want you to have this. Want you to know that this is real for me now. Not just an arrangement, not just protection. Real. Clara looked at the ring, then at his face, weathered, scarred, but open in a way she'd never seen. This was Ethan without walls, offering not just safety, but his heart. "I don't deserve this kindness," she said, old doubts surfacing. "I came to you with nothing, brought danger to your door." "You deserve care, not chains," he interrupted firmly. "You deserve love, not debt. You deserve a man who sees your worth, not your circumstances." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Let me be that man. Clara, not just in name, but in truth." She thought of James, young and full of dreams that never matched reality. He'd loved her in his way, but it had been a careless love, more focused on tomorrow's possibilities than today's needs. Ethan's love, and she could call it that now, was different, steady, practical, rooted in shared work and mutual respect. It wasn't the wild passion of youth, but something deeper, something that could weather storms and build futures. "Yes," she said simply, holding out her hand. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. Then he kissed her, gentle but thorough, a seal on promises made and futures planned. When they parted, Clara found herself truly smiling for the first time in months. "So what now?" "Now we rebuild," Ethan said. "The barn, the windows, make this place stronger than before." "I meant with us." A rare smile touched his lips. "We rebuild that too, day by day. No rushing, no forcing, just together. Together." Such a simple word for such a profound change. Clara leaned into his solid warmth, feeling the ring's weight on her finger, the steady beat of his heart under her palm. "I need to tell you something too," she said. "That first night, when you took us in, I was ready to do anything, be anything, even—" She swallowed hard. "Even things that would have shamed me. For Thomas." "I know." His arm came around her, protective. "Saw it in your eyes. That's why I made sure you knew different from the start. But you didn't know us. We could have been anyone. Why take the risk?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You reminded me of Sarah, that first night, not in looks, but in spirit, that fierce love for your child, willing to sacrifice everything. She was like that with Daniel." His voice roughened. "I couldn't save them, but maybe I could save you. Maybe that would mean something." Clara turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. "It means everything. You gave us life, Ethan. Life and dignity and hope. I can never repay—" "Not about repayment," he said firmly. "Never was. You've given as much as you've gotten. This house was a tomb before you came. Now it's home again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead. The burned barn was a dark skeleton against the sky, but even that spoke of victory. They'd defended this place, made their stand. Tomorrow would bring challenges, rebuilding, dealing with the legal aftermath of Mason's attack, the ongoing threat from Bowers. But tonight, they had peace. "We should go in," Clara said eventually. "Long day tomorrow." "In a moment." Ethan pulled her closer. "Want to remember this, the first night of our real marriage?" Clara smiled against his shoulder. "Technically, we've been married 3 days. That was paperwork. This is choice." She understood the distinction. 3 days ago, they'd stood before the minister and made legal vows. Tonight, on these battered steps of their defended home, they'd made personal ones. No witnesses except the stars. No ceremony except honest words. But more binding than any law. A sound from inside. Thomas calling out in his sleep. Clara started to rise, but Ethan was already moving. "I'll go," he said. "You rest." She watched him disappear inside, heard his low voice soothing Thomas, the creak of floorboards as he settled beside the boy's bed. Her husband, caring for her son as naturally as breathing. The sight made her chest tight with emotion. Clara looked down at her mother's ring, gleaming softly in the moonlight. It had seen one marriage, one family, one tragedy. Now it would witness another story, different but no less meaningful. A story of 2 broken people building something whole, of chosen family and earned trust, of love that grew from ashes. She rose, Went inside to find Ethan still sitting with Thomas, one large hand gentle on the boy's back. He looked up as she entered, and she saw her future in his eyes. Not perfect, not easy, but real and solid, and theirs. "Come to bed," she said softly, holding out her hand. He studied her face, understanding the invitation for what it was. Another wall coming down, another step toward true union. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He rose, took her hand, and followed her to their room. Their room now. Not just his. The bed where she'd nursed Thomas through fever would hold different memories now. Better ones. Later. Lying in the darkness with Ethan's arm around her, Clara felt complete for the first time since James died. No, longer than that. Maybe for the first time ever. This wasn't the life she'd planned as a young bride. It was harder, shaped by loss and struggle. But it was also deeper, more honest, built on truth rather than dreams, on what people did rather than what they promised. Ethan would never speak poetry or spin grand plans. But he'd stand between her and danger, teach her strength, offer respect along with love. He'd raise Thomas as his own, showing the boy what a good man looked like through example rather than words. "No regrets?" Ethan asked quietly, feeling her wakefulness. "None," Clara answered, meaning it. "You? Only that it took so long to find you." She smiled in the darkness, turning to kiss him. "We found each other when we needed to. That's what matters." Outside, dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Soon Thomas would wake, hungry and full of questions about rebuilding the barn. The day would bring work and challenges and the 1,000 small tasks of life. But they'd face them together now, truly together. Clara closed her eyes. Ethan's heartbeat steady under her palm, his mother's ring warm on her finger. She'd begged to be a servant to save her starving child. Instead, she'd found a partner, a protector, a love she hadn't known to hope for. Sometimes the best gifts came disguised as desperate chances. Sometimes home was found in the last place you'd think to look. And sometimes, two people broken by loss could build something stronger than either had been alone. The sun rose over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the little house, a family slept, not bound by blood alone, but by choice, by struggle, by the decision to stand together against whatever came. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let us know. We'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Ethan's journey. Your feedback means everything to us.